Assalamu alaikum students, a very good morning to you all. I hope you all are doing well. So by now you are done with the drugs used in the treatment of hypertension and angina, and today we'll be doing the drugs used in the treatment of heart failure. So first let's check out today's learning objectives. By the end of today's session you should be able to enumerate the drugs used in acute and chronic heart failure. Write down the mechanism of action, clinical indications and toxicity of digoxin and its mechanical and electrical effects on heart. Write down the management of digoxin toxicity and name the beta blockers used in chronic heart failure and give the rationale of their use. You must be having your notebooks and pens by your side, and you should note down the important points and the questions asked during the lecture as well. So most of the people, they usually think that heart failure means the person is dead. Is that really so? Let's check out. Heart failure is a condition in which cardiac output is inadequate for the needs of the body. Means the blood that is pumped out by the left ventricle is not sufficient to meet the daily requirements of the body. It is a highly lethal condition with a 5-year mortality rate of around 50%, and it is usually a progressive disease and is characterized by gradual reduction in the cardiac performance. Sometimes acute episodes do occur and they need immediate hospitalization as well. The most common causes of heart failure are coronary artery disease and hypertension. So, how do we measure the cardiac output and how would we know the patient's heart is going into failure? There is a test known as echocardiography, which measures the ejection fraction of the heart. And if you recall physiology, ejection fraction is the percentage of the total blood in the left ventricle that is pumped out with each beat. So normally it has to be more than 55%. Okay. So if it would be less than 55%, we'll say the patient's heart is going into failure. It doesn't mean the patient will die. It means it is not pumping out enough blood that will meet the daily requirements of that particular person. Let's take the example of your exams. The passing percentage in exam is 50%, right? So a student who will score 49%, you will say he has failed the exam, and even the student scoring 12% has failed the exam. Same is the case with heart failure. If a person's uh, ejection fraction is 50, he will say he is in heart failure, his heart is failing, and even if it's 15%, it's failing. But the symptoms would be different and the severity of the disease would be different. The cardiac performance is decreased in heart failure, and the normal cardiac performance depends upon the following four factors: preload, afterload, cardiac contractility, and heart rate. Preload is the end diastolic volume and the filling pressures, and it depends upon the venous return and venous tone. Afterload is the resistance against which the heart pumps. We'll see in the next slides that contractility of the heart depends upon which factors. Normal cardiac contractility depends upon the following factors. This is a cardiac myocyte. To understand what's actually happening in the heart failure and what are the drugs which can be used to treat heart failure, it is really important to understand this diagram. This is a cardiac myocyte. These are the actin and myosin filaments, sarcoplasmic reticulum which stores calcium, the cytoplasm and the extracellular space. And we all know the most important ion for the contraction of cardiac muscle is calcium. So the normal cardiac contractility, it depends upon the sensitivity of these contractile proteins to calcium, the amount of calcium released from the sarcoplasmic reticulum, the amount of calcium stored in the sarcoplasmic reticulum, the amount of triggered calcium that enters the cell through L-type voltage gated calcium channels, the activity of sodium calcium exchanger. This is an antiport. As you can see, this is an antiporter. It uses sodium gradient to move calcium against its concentration gradient from the cytoplasm into the extracellular space, and its ability to carry out this transport is mainly dependent on the intracellular concentration of sodium ion. Then we have another transporter or pump, that is sodium potassium ATPase. So the contractile activity also depends upon the intracellular sodium concentration as well as the activity of the sodium potassium ATPase, which removes the intracellular sodium, and this pump is the major determinant of sodium in the cell. And as you can see, it is the primary target of the cardiac glycosides. So you really need to have a clear picture in your mind to understand the pathophysiology and the mechanism of action of the drugs which are used in the treatment of heart failure. So if we increase this calcium, then the contractility would increase. To understand the pathophysiology of heart failure, we must first recall the normal circulatory pathway. What was happening? The deoxygenated blood comes into the right side of the heart, the right ventricle pumps it to the lungs where it is oxygenated, and the oxygenated blood comes to the left side of the heart. The left ventricle then pumps it to rest of the body. Clear? So just imagine if the ventricles are not able to pump the blood properly, what would happen? So heart failure can occur in just one ventricle, either the right one or the left one, or it can involve both ventricles as well. So if the left ventricle is not able to pump the blood, what will happen? The blood overfills the ventricles because of the damaged heart muscle, and it will flow back into the lungs, causing pulmonary complications like pulmonary edema, shortness of breath, cough. And if the right ventricle is not able to pump the blood properly, it will overfill the ventricles and it will flow back, and it will produce peripheral edema, ascites. So as the pumping action of the heart grows weaker, the patient would present with coughing, and if there is left heart failure, the patient will have pulmonary edema, and the patient would present with shortness of breath and tiredness because cardiac output won't meet his daily requirements. And due to right-sided heart failure, patient will be having peripheral edema presenting as edema in ankles and legs, that would be the pitting type, and ascites as well. So when the heart is not pumping properly and cardiac output is not sufficient to meet the requirements of the body, multiple compensatory processes will start in the body, which will further weaken the failing heart. Extrinsic and intrinsic compensation occurs. The extrinsic compensation involves two major mechanisms, the sympathetic nervous system and the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. When cardiac output decreases, the baroreceptor sensory input is reduced, which will increase the sympathetic discharge, and thus there would be tachycardia, the force of contraction would be increased, and preload and afterload will be increased, and there will be an increase in cardiac output via compensation. And simultaneously, when cardiac output decreases, the renal blood flow decreases, which will increase the release of renin and increase production of angiotensin 2, which is a potent vasoconstrictor, causing increase in afterload, and aldosterone secretion will also increase, which will cause sodium and water retention, and it will increase the preload as well, and all these changes will lead to remodeling of the myocardial cells. So this is kind of a vicious cycle for progression of heart failure, like decrease in cardiac output, which it would increase the production of norepinephrine, angiotensin 2 and endothelin, that will increase afterload, and because of increase afterload, the ejection fraction would further decrease, that will lead to decrease in cardiac output, and the cycle will repeat. The compensatory increased sympathetic drive would also increase the caspases, which are the enzymes responsible for apoptosis, and it will cause the down regulation of beta 1 receptors as well. The intrinsic compensation is the myocardial hypertrophy. There would be increase in the muscle mass to help to maintain the cardiac performance. And after this initial beneficial effect, there would be structural changes in the heart, and abnormal myocardial cells will be formed, and this is called remodeling. And we can see it on a chest radiograph. You can see this cardiomegaly, the hypertrophy of the heart. So I hope you have understood the pathophysiology of the heart failure, what is actually happening, and how we are going to treat the patients with heart failure. So the treatment goals are to reduce the symptoms and to slow the progression of the disease as well during the stable periods, like in chronic heart failure, and how to manage the acute episodes of decompensated failure. So the treatment options would be different for acute heart failure and chronic heart failure. You have to memorize this table. This is really important. You can get this question in your exam. Enumerate the drugs used to treat acute heart failure and the drugs used to treat chronic heart failure. So if a patient presents in emergency with acute heart failure, patient is either having pulmonary edema or the cardiac output is really low. So what you would do? In that condition, we really need positive inotropic drugs like beta agonists, dopamine and dobutamine. They would be of help in those cases. But the first line drugs would be obviously the diuretics to decrease the blood volume, to decrease the preload. We will use the loop diuretics obviously in acute heart failure. And diuretics, vasodilators, beta agonists, bipyridines, these are also positive inotropic drugs, and natriuretic peptides. These are the drugs that can be used in the management of acute heart failure. That is the emergency management that would occur in a hospital setting. And in chronic heart failure, in addition to treat the symptoms, we also have to slow the progression of disease. We don't want the remodeling to happen. Fine. So what we do, we can use diuretics. In mild cases, we would use thiazide diuretics, of course. We can use aldosterone receptor antagonists, AC inhibitors, ARBs, beta blockers. These drugs, the aldosterone antagonists, AC inhibitors, ARBs and beta blockers, they really reduce the mortality in patients of heart failure. Cardiac glycosides are the only positive inotropic drugs that are used in heart failure, and vasodilators can also be used. So you need to memorize this table. You have studied almost all the drugs that we mentioned for the management of acute and chronic heart failure. You are done with the diuretics, AC inhibitors, ARBs, vasodilators. So in this session, we'll discuss only the drugs which you have not done, or the important aspects of the drugs, like why beta blockers are used in chronic heart failure, because they are decreasing the force of contraction. Then why are we using them, and how are they reducing the mortality? So we will be touching those points only. So the drugs which you haven't done, these are the cardiac glycosides, bipyridines, natriuretic peptides. We will discuss them one by one. Cardiac glycosides are really important from examination point of view, although they are not the first line drugs for heart failure, but since they are often asked in exams, so you have to do their uses, adverse effects, their pharmacological actions that are really, really important. So they are often called digitalis because most of them come from a digitalis plant, which is foxglove plant. All cardiac glycosides include a steroid nucleus, a lactone ring, and one or more sugar residues. Their structure is really important. This question can be asked to you in your exams during Viva. You should know their structure, that they have a steroid nucleus, they have a lactone ring, and sugar residues. Their pharmacokinetics depends on the sugar part, which is the glycone part, and the pharmacodynamics depend on the A-glycone part. And the prototype of the cardiac glycosides is digoxin. So this is their structure. This is the steroid part, which is a glycon part, a lactone ring, and sugar residues, which is the glycone part. Most of the drugs which have lactone ring, their important adverse effect is like gynecomastia, impotence. That would be their adverse effect. So digoxin also causes gynecomastia in males. So let's discuss digoxin in detail. Its oral bioavailability is 60 to 75%. It has a very long half-life of 36 to 40 hours and has a low therapeutic index. Since it is having low therapeutic index, we have to monitor the blood levels of digoxin as well. It is widely distributed to almost all tissues, including central nervous system. 60% of the drug is excreted through kidneys and 40% through hepatic metabolism. So the important points in pharmacokinetics are its long duration of action and low therapeutic index. So its mechanism of action. This is a very important diagram. You can get a question like draw the mechanism of action of digoxin, or you can write the mechanism of action of digoxin. So you should practice this diagram as well. It's not important to draw it as such, but there are some things which should be there in your diagram, like sodium potassium ATPase, sodium calcium exchanger, and we did this earlier when we were discussing the contractility of the cardiac myocytes. So there we said the site of action of digoxin is the sodium potassium ATPase. So this is where digoxin would act, and this is the site which it would block. So digoxin will block the sodium potassium ATPase. What it was doing, sodium potassium ATPase was pumping sodium out of the cell. So sodium won't go out of the cell. Intracellular level of sodium will rise, and this level was important for the functioning of sodium calcium exchanger, which was bringing sodium in and moving calcium out. So calcium won't go out because intracellular level of sodium is already high, it's not going out, so intracellular calcium would also increase. It will get stored in the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and upon release it will result in the contraction of the cardiac muscle. So the basic function which it's doing is it is increasing the level of intracellular calcium, but it is doing it indirectly by blocking the sodium potassium ATPase. I hope it's clear to you by now. There is another important point which I want to highlight over here, that digoxin binds to the sodium potassium ATPase at the same site where potassium would bind. So it means that potassium and digoxin are competing for the same site on the sodium potassium ATPase. So now you can think, if there is hyperkalemia, means the level of potassium is high in the extracellular fluid, then what would happen? More potassium would be available to bind, and it will not allow digoxin to bind to its site, and its action will not be that much. And if there is hypokalemia, means we have less molecules of potassium over here, digoxin would have all the sites and it will bind them frequently, and its toxicity would increase. So it's clear that hypokalemia increases digoxin toxicity and hyperkalemia decreases the effectiveness of digoxin. And how is it occurring? Now you know that digoxin and potassium, they compete for the same site on the sodium potassium ATPase. So in case of hypokalemia, the more digoxin will bind and its toxicity will increase. So what is digoxin doing? We have already seen it in the diagram. Let's check it out. It will inhibit the sodium potassium ATPase, will lead to small increase in the intracellular sodium, and this increased sodium alters the driving force for sodium calcium exchange by the exchanger. So less calcium is removed from the cell, and the increased intracellular calcium is stored in the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and it increases the contractility. Also modifies the autonomic outflow and thus it affects the electrical properties of the heart. At low doses, it has parasympathomimetic effect, and at high doses, it sensitizes the myocardium to the action of catecholamines. This is a diagram from the Lippincott. You can use any diagram, but it should show the sodium potassium ATPase and sodium calcium exchanger. This is a simpler one. So now the next question is which you get in your exam is to write down the mechanical and electrical effects of digoxin on the heart. So now we saw because it was increasing the calcium, it is increasing the contractility. And increase in contractility leads to increased ventricular ejection, increased cardiac output, and when cardiac output will increase, obviously renal perfusion will increase as well. And this will then decrease the compensatory sympathetic and renal responses, which were further worsening the failing heart. Will reduce the heart rate, reduce the preload and afterload, and will permit the heart to function more efficiently. Clear? So now let's see its electrical effects on the heart. Uh, Digoxin is also having a parasympathomimetic effect. So what it would do on the SA node and AV node, if you recall the parasympathetic system, they were having negative chronotropic and negative dromotropic effect. So it would decrease the heart rate. So at SA node it would decrease the rate, and at AV node it would decrease the conduction velocity. When the conduction velocity will slow down, the refractory period will increase. And how it will be shown on ECG? It will increase the PR interval, because the PR interval, it shows the atrioventricular conduction. So it has been slowed, so PR interval would be increased. Then atrial muscle. In atrial muscle, the action potential depends mainly on the calcium ions. So if calcium ions are increasing, action potentials will be generated rapidly and the refractory period would decrease. Same would be the case in Purkinje system and ventricular muscle. Because of increase in intracellular calcium, more action, the refractory period would decrease because it will contract frequently. And at toxic doses, at the Purkinje system, extrasystole will occur, tachycardia and fibrillation, ventricular fibrillation, ventricular tachycardia, this will occur, premature ventricular beats will appear, and on ECG the QT interval will be shortened. QT interval shows the period of ventricular depolarization and repolarization, and that interval will be shortened. And there would be some other changes on ECG. If you get a question to write the ECG changes because of digoxin, so the PR interval will prolong, QT interval will shorten, the ST segment is depressed, and there would be T wave inversion as well. And this is called a reverse tick sign. You can see this is a reverse tick. So these things will happen, and pre-ventricular beats will occur, which will appear as bigeminy, means a beat will come before time. Clear? So let's revise the electrical effects of digoxin on the heart. So first we'll discuss its effect on SA node and AV node. On SA node, it is having a parasympathomimetic effect, so it will decrease the heart rate. On AV node, it will decrease the conduction velocity, it will increase the refractory period, and the PR interval will be increased as well. So on atria and on ventricles, it will decrease the refractory period and QT interval will be shortened. And what kind of arrhythmias or it can produce? It will produce premature ventricular beats, ventricular tachycardia, ventricular fibrillation by Gemini, and it can also produce ST segment depression and T wave inversion. Now the clinical uses, since we have been studying it in heart failure, so it is used in congestive heart failure or chronic heart failure, but we never use it in acute heart failure, and it is the only positive inotropic drug that is used in the treatment of congestive heart failure. It is used in atrial flutter and fibrillation because it was slowing the conduction velocity, and in paroxysmal atrial tachycardia and atrioventricular nodal tachycardia. It is not used in the treatment of ventricular arrhythmias because it is itself producing the ventricular arrhythmias. Its adverse effects, these are very important. Usually the person presents with anorexia first. Anorexia is the loss of appetite, nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. Nausea and vomiting, they can occur due to its effect on the chemoreceptor trigger zone or due to its parasympathomimetic effect. It produces arrhythmias in toxic doses. We studied earlier it can produce effects on central nervous system as well, so it can produce confusion or hallucinations, produces visual disturbances and color perception aberrations. Patient sees halos around the bright objects, and gynecomastia because of the presence of lactone ring in its structure. So these are the important adverse effects, and anorexia, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea are the most important adverse effects of digoxin. Now, how to treat digitalis toxicity or digoxin toxicity? The toxicity could be accidental, it could be suicidal as well. That would be severe acute intoxication, like suicidal overdose. So, if it is due a chronic intoxication because of the long-term use of digoxin, then what we do, first of all, we have to correct the potassium or magnesium deficiency. So mostly we said digoxin is usually never used alone. It is mostly given with diuretics, and diuretics used in heart failure are mostly the loop diuretics or thiazide diuretics. So what would they do? They produce hypokalemia, and we discussed earlier hypokalemia will increase the toxicity of digoxin. So what will you do in that case? You will omit 1 or 2 doses of digitalis and give oral or parenteral potassium supplements. Clear? But if it is severe acute intoxication, that is suicidal overdose, in that case there is already a marked hyperkalemia because digoxin is blocking the sodium potassium ATPase, so potassium is remaining in the extracellular fluid, and already there is hyperkalemia, so you don't give potassium in that case. So what we discussed till now, if a patient presents to you in ER with the digitalis toxicity, if it is a chronic intoxication and the potassium levels are low, obviously you will check the potassium levels. If they are low, you will omit 1 or 2 doses and you will give the potassium supplements. But if it is an acute intoxication, accidental or suicidal overdosage it is, then already the patient is having hyperkalemia, so you won't be giving him any potassium. If the patient is presenting only with the extracardiac manifestations like anorexia, nausea, vomiting or hallucinations, etc., then you would stop the drug or reduce the dose of the drug. Then we'll give antiarrhythmic drugs if the patient is having any kind of arrhythmia, and the antiarrhythmic drugs used for treating digoxin toxicity are lidocaine, phenytoin and propranolol. You can get this question in exam, MCQ or short question. And if there is severe acute digitalis overdose, the patient might need an electronic pacemaker. These drugs won't help in that case. And in acute cases, usually we give digoxin antibodies, which is digibind. Now the drug interactions. Quinidine usually displaces digoxin from its binding site, increases its levels and also reduces its renal clearance. Therefore, digoxin level would be increased. And digitalis toxicity, usually its arrhythmogenic properties increased by hypokalemia, hypomagnesemia and hypercalcemia. And how can hypokalemia be produced? Obviously, if the patient is using diuretics, it will produce hypokalemia and serious cardiac arrhythmias can occur. And these diuretics will precipitate digitalis toxicity. And if the patient is having digitalis induced vomiting, we know vomiting depletes serum magnesium, and hypomagnesemia will also facilitate the digoxin toxicity. So the digoxin toxicity is increased by hypokalemia, hypomagnesemia and hypercalcemia. So pause your video for 5 minutes and take a short break. We'll be discussing the remaining drugs afterwards. Okay. So since we started with digoxin, let's discuss first the drugs which are used in the treatment of chronic heart failure. Diuretics are usually the first line therapy in both acute and chronic heart failure. Furosemide, which is a loop diuretic, it is usually used in acute heart failure and in moderate to severe chronic heart failure, and hydrochlorothiazide is used in mild chronic failure. Aldosterone antagonist diuretics like spironolactone and eplerenone, they are used in chronic failure, and as we discussed earlier, they also reduce mortality. So you can get a question, which drugs reduce mortality when given in chronic heart failure. These are aldosterone receptor antagonists, AC inhibitors, ARBs, and beta blockers. Next are the angiotensin antagonists. These are AC inhibitors and ARBs. You have studied them in detail earlier. They reduce preload and afterload. If preload and afterload would decrease, the cardiac output would increase. It reduces aldosterone secretion, salt and water retention. It also reduces the sympathetic activity. It will reduce cardiac remodeling, and it will reduce morbidity and mortality in chronic heart failure. You can get a question, what is the rationale of using angiotensin antagonist in the treatment of chronic heart failure? In that question, you would write that it reduces preload, afterload, aldosterone secretion, sympathetic activity, and reduces cardiac remodeling and morbidity and mortality. These lines are really, really important because we have to prevent the remodeling, right? Then are the beta blockers. So there are certain beta blockers which are used in heart failure. Not all of them are used, and they are used only in chronic heart failure. You never ever give it in acute heart failure. These are metoprolol, carvedilol, bisoprolol, and nebivolol. You can memorize it with acronym MCB and MCB. M for metoprolol, C for carvedilol, B for bisoprolol, and N for nebivolol. And the most important thing, they are used only in chronic heart failure. If you will give it in acute heart failure, what will happen? The heart is not pumping already. If you will give some negative inotropic drug, it will worsen the contractility of the heart. Okay, so you have to give it only in chronic heart failure, and only these 4 beta blockers are used. Only these 4. The rationale why we are using it, because it reduces the adverse effects of high concentrations of catecholamines, including apoptosis. As we read earlier, the compensatory mechanisms, they come into play as soon as the cardiac output decreases. So the catecholamines, they will be producing adverse effects, and we also discussed that caspases are produced which cause apoptosis, and that will also produce remodeling, etc. So it will decrease those effects, and it will upregulate the beta 1 receptors. It will decrease the heart rate, and it will reduce remodeling through inhibition of mitogenic activity of catecholamines. So these are the reasons why we are using beta blockers in chronic heart failure, because it will reduce the adverse effects of circulating catecholamines, including apoptosis, and because of that compensatory process, long-term release of the uh, catecholamines, it will lead to downregulation of beta receptors. So if we'll give beta blockers, it will upregulate the beta receptors. It will also decrease the heart rate, and it will reduce the remodeling by inhibiting mitogenic activity, because we don't want the formation of new myocytes and the connective tissue for remodeling. We have to prevent that hypertrophy thing. So this is the rationale, and this is really important. Now, the drugs used in acute heart failure, beta 1 agonists, dopamine and dobutamine, you have already studied these 2 drugs. They are used in acute failure only, they are not used in chronic failure. And you can get an MCQ, the only positive inotropic drug that is used in chronic heart failure is digoxin. Others we don't give because they will increase the mortality. Next are bipyridines. They are also positive inotropic drugs. They are phosphodiesterase inhibitors. Phosphodiesterase is an enzyme which is required for the breakdown of cyclic AMP to AMP. So to increase the contractility, we need to increase the level of cyclic AMP. So these drugs increase the level of cyclic AMP. These are inamrinone and milrinone, and they are usually given parenterally. They increase cyclic AMP by inhibiting its breakdown by phosphodiesterases, leading to increase in cardiac intracellular calcium. They also cause vasodilation, and they will decrease afterload, and they increase the sensitivity of contractile protein system to calcium at high doses, and this was an important factor for the normal contractility of the cardiac muscle. We discussed it earlier. They should not be used in chronic failure because they have been shown to increase the morbidity and mortality. And the only positive inotropic drug used in chronic heart failure is digoxin. Its toxicity, it produces nausea and vomiting, and in Embrenon produces thrombocytopenia and changes in LFTs, and cardiac arrhythmias are more with milrinone. Now the last group, vasodilators. So, nitroprusside, nitroglycerin, natriuretic peptide, which is naziretide, they all are used in acute heart failure, and hydralazine and isosorbide dinitrate, they are used in chronic heart failure. Mostly they are given in combination. This diagram is showing a step ladder approach that in different stages of heart failure how we are going to manage the patient. So stage A is a patient is having high risk for heart failure but he is asymptomatic. So in that case what would you do? You would reduce the risk factors and you will educate the patient. Like if he's hypertensive, you will advise sodium restriction, exercise, dietary changes, that's all. You will treat the hypertension, diabetes, dyslipidemia, and if required, ACE inhibitors or ARBs would be given to the patient. Then stage B would be the patient is having structural heart disease, but he is asymptomatic. Asymptomatic, like a patient comes to you, you just advise echocardiography. He's having no symptom, and it was an accidental finding that is ejection fraction is reduced, but he is asymptomatic. In that cases, we will give ACE inhibitors or ARBs, and beta blockers could also be given. As we discussed earlier, these are the drugs which will reduce the mortality and morbidity in uh, chronic heart failure. Then is the stage C, in which the patient is also symptomatic. In those cases, we'll give the diuretics, we can give ACE inhibitors, beta blockers for chronic heart failure, we can give digoxin as well. So this is the approach how to manage the patient. Now the time for some MCQs. You will write down just the question number and its answer and take its picture and send it in the WhatsApp group for your attendance. This is today's assignment. So first question. A 5-year-old child is brought to the emergency room with sinus arrest and a heart rate of 35 beats per minute. Means he is having bradycardia. An empty bottle of his uncle's digoxin was found where he was playing. Which of the following is the drug of choice in treating a severe overdose of digoxin? So what's happening in this case? Why is he having bradycardia? Because of the parasympathomimetic effect of digoxin. And this is accidental overdosage. What will you give? Digoxin antibodies, lidocaine infusion, magnesium infusion, phenytoin or potassium? What will you do? Which of the following drugs has been shown to prolong life in patients with chronic heart failure in spite of having a negative inotropic effect on cardiac contractility? So, one drug is which is having a negative inotropic effect, but it will prolong the life of the patient. It's carvedilol, digoxin, dobutamine, enalapril, or furosemide. A patient who has been taking digoxin for several years for atrial fibrillation and chronic heart failure is about to receive atropine for another condition. A common effect of digoxin at therapeutic blood levels that can be almost entirely blocked by atropine is decreased appetite, means anorexia, headaches, increased atrial contractility, increased PR interval on ECG, or tachycardia. That's all for today. I hope you have understood the topic, but still, if you have any query, you can ask in your WhatsApp group and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Write down the assignment, take its picture, send it in your WhatsApp group for attendance purpose, and take care of yourself. Have a good day. Allah Hafiz.